Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a 4-game college basketball slate, and we have a 6-game NBA slate. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? It really helps the channel a lot, and I really do appreciate it. Uh, we're going to look at both these slates. This is a fairly interesting day for college basketball and for the NBA, so we do have a lot of injuries in the NBA slate. We're going to do that first, then we'll get in the college basketball slate. So for the injury report here, we have the Hornets with Ball, Williams, Martin, Ball, Williams, Martin, Mann, and Curry out. For the Suns, Gordon and Okogie are out. For the Cavaliers, this is where it's going to get interesting. Garland, Wade, and Struss are questionable. Mitchell is doubtful, and Mobley is out. For the Bulls, Levine is out. For the Warriors, Curry remains out. For the Spurs, Osman and Bazzi are out. For the Raptors, Barrett, Brown Jr., and Boucher are questionable, and Barnes and Podol are out. And for the Celtics, Tatum, Brown, White, and Holiday are questionable. Porzingis is out. And for the Trailblazers, Grant is questionable, and Brogdon, Sharp, and Williams are out. So the two big questions here really are the Cavaliers and the Celtics. Uh, Guys being questionable and out, as well as the Raptors. Those are the three teams that we're going to have to look at as the day goes on to give us some more information, better value and stuff. Right now, it's really hard to justify any core plays, um, simply because there's a lot of questionable tags. And honestly, nobody was priced super well on the slate so far, at least. And so I think it's a pretty risky slate overall, so it's not my favorite one. But we're just going to start top to bottom and kind of go through the guys. So Luka is going to be a great play on the slate. He has a whopping 62 fantasy points to pay off here. But he's been doing that in 7 straight games. He's been over 70 fantasy points in all 7 of the last 7 games. So if we can find good value to open up today with all the questionable tags, he will definitely be worth a look and be a good way to knock in some good points here. I will mention though that one of his worst games of the season were against Chicago early this year, where he scored just 46 fantasy points, which is a lot, which isn't much for him. Looking at Jokic here for Denver, he's not been as consistent as Luka, but he's still capable, and he needs 58 fantasy points to pay off here, which he's done in 6 of the last 9 games. He is GPP only, as he is in a little bit of a tougher matchup, but he's done well against Charlotte so far this season in his first game. And he's been playing pretty well throughout the year, and he's got triple-double watch potential on this one as well. Then we're going to look at Jarrett Allen for Cleveland. Now, he's going to get a nice boost, it looks like, today with Mitchell likely out, and then a bunch of other guys questionable. Obviously, if those guys get ruled out, he gets even bigger boosts. And I do like his double-double potential today. Even in the last game, he didn't do very well against Brooklyn, but in all the other pre-games with Mitchell out, he's been pretty solid fantasy-wise. He is a little bit pricier than I was hoping he'd be, but he's definitely in a good spot and has a lot of upside in this matchup. Looking at Cade Cunningham for Detroit, his price is moving up as well. For good reason, though. He's been over 40 fantasy points in 8 of the past 9 games, and four of those games he's been over 50 fantasy points. This matchup also gives him some major upside. He's got a lot of potential to have a solid game, and he's been playing very well lately, so he's definitely worth a look, as I do like his potential here. Looking at Vucevic for the Bulls, now he's got a pretty good matchup here against Dallas, who's been kind of streaky against big guys, and he's absolutely been solid this season in these types of situations. And he did good against Dallas the first time they played with 52 fantasy points. But he's been playing pretty well, and he has a good ceiling and a pretty safe floor. He's not been as safe as I expected him to be this year, but he is pretty safe, and his price is not overbearing, which is impossible to use him or anything like that. The only downside is there's actually quite a few good centers today, so he's not going to be a must-play from that perspective. Looking at Jamal Murray, he tends to be somewhat streaky, but he's been playing really well right now. His price is still pretty solid. In the last 8 games, he's been on a bit of a tear. All but one game against Miami, uh, he was able to be very solid in, and he had 350 fantasy point games in the last 4. He can be streaky, but he's playing as good as any guard right now, so he's definitely worth a look because he can catch fire and score in bunches. Looking at DeMar DeRozan, DeRozan has also been a pretty solid play for us throughout the season. He has a pretty safe floor, and he's had a pretty good ceiling lately. He hasn't been as consistent as I like, but his price is still pretty good, and he's definitely worth a good look here. In 5 of the last 6 games, he's been over 43 fantasy points. As long as this game, excuse me, as long as this game is pretty close near the end, he's going to have a lot of opportunity to have a good game here. So, and I kind of expect that today. Looking at DeAndre Ayton, oopsie, he has came back the first game back since he's been out for a few games, and he played very solid. And this game had a 30-19 game. I look for him to continue to play well here. His price is still pretty good, though it is going to go higher as we go probably, and it's a little bit higher from what it has been. But he's been playing well before he took a few games off with his light injuries, and so we'll look to see if he can get um, if he can get back on track and stay consistent the rest of the way. I do like his price today, and he's one of the better priced options on this slate, but he definitely carries some risk as he does have a low floor. Looking at Karis LeVert for Cleveland, his price is rising. If Garland, Stress, and Mitchell are all ruled out, then he becomes a great play here. However, he does carry some risk if any of those guys do play because he'll uh, spread out the usage a little bit to other guys. But right now, he's been playing pretty well. The only thing I don't like about him is his price. He's come up quite a bit, and so that makes it keeps him from being a core plate, even if those guys are out. But I do like how he's played lately, and the matchup as well is really good for him. Looking at Jalen Duren here, he's had a pretty up and down season, but right now he should get a lot of opportunity in this game. And if you move this Dallas game and the Orlando game out and just ignore those two games, he's been one of the more consistent players for Detroit lately. He has a good matchup against Charlotte, who haven't stopped anybody, and I do like his potential in this one. Obviously, his price dropping helps as well, and he was very close to being considered a core play on the slate. It was just hard to trust it right now. But we'll wait and see if we get the injury reports for the three teams that have a lot of questionable tags, and that could make him a very good core play. Looking at Mystic for Charlotte, he's moved in the starting lineup, and he has played pretty solid throughout that as he's gotten in there. Now, he is in a positive situation, and he's been getting over 28 minutes a game in the last few, so he has some upside. He does have that lower floor, which is a concern, and he's only, obviously the amount of games he's played is very limited so far, but he definitely has some potential as he's playing well and taking a lot of shots. He does seem to be a little bit scoring dependent, as uh, even though he is getting some assists and stuff. I think if he doesn't get a lot of assists and rebounds, he's going to have struggle to pay off here, and that is a little bit of a concern to me on this particular slate. Looking at Alex Caruso, he's been very boomer bust lately, but he's pretty cheap today. His price is still the same range, and while he has a low floor and a high ceiling, he's someone to consider as he does have some upside here. But he has that low floor, which we have to contend with. And then we'll look at Trace Jackson Davis for Golden State. He made the starting lineup last game. If that is going to continue to be the case, then he should be a guy that you consider today against the Spurs. Now, Wemby obviously is going to be back, it looks like, so that could draw some concern here, but he has some good potential here if he can get in and get the 20 plus minutes. I'm a little concerned about his minutes because I feel like they're just trying different things, trying to figure out how to get wins, and they're struggling as a team, but he's been playing pretty well when he gets the opportunity, and so he's definitely worth a look. Um, he's only started 4 games this season, but he did very well at all 4 of those, so he's interesting, but he does carry some risk. I'm now going to talk about the 3 teams that have a lot of injury questions, one being Cleveland. So obviously, if Mitchell, who looks like he's going to be out, is out, then that does open up LeVert some. But obviously, if Garland and Struss were also ruled out, that would also open up Merrill and Nang and Okoro. So do keep those in mind, but they definitely carry some risk today at this point, at the very least. But hopefully, we get some good information before the slate locks. Looking at Toronto with Barrett questionable, that would definitely give Quickly some more utility here, though Quickly's price has shot up quite a bit. That's going to make it somewhat difficult, but with Barnes and Podol already out, that does open up Quickly and Olenek some. However, I would feel a little bit more confident about Olenek if Barrett is out, but he's also overpriced. Gary Trent Jr. is moving into kind of a decent play, as is Grady Dick, but they definitely carry a lot of risk on this slate because they're a tough matchup here. And then looking at the Celtics, obviously if all these guys are ruled out, then we're going to find a ton of value here with Pritchard and Hauser and Horford and Cornette. Even Tillman has some utility here. Of course, then that would be very lackluster. So I'm guessing that 1 or 2 of these guys plays and a couple of them sit. And if that's the case, then some of these guys like Hauser and Pritchard will probably have some utility here. because they're near minimum price. But obviously, we're going to have to wait and see. And that game being late is definitely not going to be ideal for finding that out. But hopefully, we get good information on who's going to play at this, late before the slate locks. Looking at this college basketball slate now, so we've got a pretty decent college basketball slate. We have 4 games here. 2 of these are Horizon League semifinal games, and the other 2 are the WCC finals, or sorry, semifinal games. So we have Cleveland and Oakland, and then we have, Cleveland State and Oakland, and then UW Milwaukee and Northern Kentucky, and then we have um, Santa Clara versus St. Mary and San Francisco versus Gonzaga. So the highest scoring game on the slate is the NKU UW Milwaukee game. The lowest scoring game on the slate is St. Mary Santa Clara. Uh, 3 of these games have about a 6 to 8. Sorry, 3 of these games have a 6 to 8 point spread, and then we have one that is lower at 1.5 points, which is the Northern Kentucky game here. But we have some utility, some good options throughout the slate, and so I'll get into those. We do have a little bit of an injury report here. Excuse me. For Cleveland State, DeBrick is out and Inara is questionable, and then for St. Mary's, Jefferson is out, and for NKU, Vincent is out. So do keep those in mind. So I'm just going to break each one of these down game to game. So first we'll look at the Cleveland Oakland game. Now this game does feature 144 point total and a 6.5 point spread in Oakland's favor. Oakland does look favorable today to me, as I think they have the better options from a fantasy perspective, as they're pretty fairly priced. I do think that I did look and check that these 2 teams had a 1-1 record against each other during the regular season, so they split the series. But I did look at some of the peripheral stats, and we have some good options from this game. Townsend being one of my favorite plays on the slate in general. He is $8,000, but he's played fairly well throughout the year. He's got a pretty safe ceiling. Oh, sorry, pretty safe floor and a really high ceiling for this game. He also did very well against Cleveland State in the 2 games that they played, with 42 and 38 fantasy points in those 2 games. He averages 16 points and 7 rebounds a game, and he has a lot of opportunity to have a pretty solid game here. So I look for him to get potentially a double-double, and if he does that, he'll definitely pay off and then some. The other guy I like here for this team a lot is Lampman for Oakland. Now, he does have a lower floor, so that is a little bit of a concern, but he's pretty cheap here at $5,900. He's also averaging 13 points, 3 rebounds, and 3 assists a game. He's one of the only guys that averages more than 3 threes per game as well on the slate, with the exception of one of his teammates. And so I do like his potential, and he's pretty safe when it comes to his price and his ceiling and floor. So I think he's a pretty viable option, even though he does have a lower floor than we'd like. He has a high ceiling and is one of the better plays from this game in general. In fact, he's probably the second or third. I think he might end up being the third or fourth highest scorer for this entire game. So do keep that in mind from a fantasy perspective. Looking at other options from this team, we did like Cole a little bit, as he does have some utility, especially if Jones continues to miss. Now, I do wanted to mention this about Oakland. So Jones missed the last game and was limited in the game before that. Actually, the last few games before that. But if he does play, he would definitely get a boost, as he has some nice potential. But he doesn't look like he'll be playing today, but there's not really any information on that. Looking at Cleveland State here, there really wasn't too much here that I liked. I felt like this team is a little bit pricey for what they have to do, and with Inara questionable, and he looks like he's going to be a game time decision. It's going to be tough to gauge this team, especially considering the fact that they were very inconsistent against Oakland this season, and they've been inconsistent as a team. They also play a relatively deep bench with 2 or 3 guys coming off the bench at the very least, which is a bit longer bench than most of the other teams outside of Santa Clara on this slate. So they're kind of an avoidable team, but if I was going to pick anybody, if Anar doesn't play, then I would be interested in Williams and a little bit of Arnett, but he's going to have a lot of risk involved. So uh, looking at the St. Mary's and Santa Clara game, now this game features a very interesting situation with St. Mary's. Basically, they play a very short bench. They're also 2-0 against Santa Clara this season. I do expect that to continue here. Now this game does have a tighter, uh, does have the biggest spread at 8 points for St. Mary, or sorry, for Santa Clara. No, I'm sorry. Uh, yeah, St. Mary's is favored by 8 points here. I do expect them to win, and it does have the lowest total on the slate. But I also felt like St. Mary has some of the best priced players on this one. Not only that, but they play a pretty tight bench. In fact, they really have a 5.5 to 6 man rotation most games, and so that definitely draws some potential here for them. We'll start by looking at Dukas. He's probably my favorite play from this team. He averages 9 points and 5 rebounds a game. He's very close to having a really solid upside game here. Now, he doesn't have the highest of ceilings, and he had some inconsistencies against Santa Clara this season, but he definitely has that potential to have a big game, and I do think it's a very solid option on the slate. Then we're going to look at Mahani for them as well. Now, he's nice and cheap today. He definitely carries a little bit of risk as he has a lower floor than his prices, but he's pretty safe from this perspective. He averages 13 points per game. He is a little bit of a scoring dependent player, but I think this matchup really does favor his upside, and he's definitely worth a look here. Then we'll look at Marciuliananis. Sorry for butchering your name. He also looks like a really solid play, though he's more expensive. He has one of the higher ceilings on this slate, and he has a pretty safe floor. He's also one of the few guys on the entire slate that gets a decent amount of rebounds and assists, so he definitely draws some utility from that perspective. Obviously, you could look at Saxon and Forbes from this team as well, but they do carry some risk as they don't typically play quite as many minutes. Barrett usually comes off the bench, but he's a little bit overpriced on this one. So I do think that the Dukas, Mahani, and Marcelinius are the best plays from this team. Looking over at St. Mary, or sorry, Santa Clara. Sorry, I'm butchering these. Obviously, Santa Clara has been 0-2 against St. Mary's this season. They're going to have a tough game here. They really only had one guy that I even felt was really that reasonable today. They play an extremely deep bench, and that is a problem from a fantasy perspective. I kind of feel like this is a team to pretty much avoid, but if you wanted to use anybody, I think Johnny O'Neill is probably the safest play on the slate as he has a pretty safe floor and an okay ceiling. It's not great, but it's not terrible. His price is pretty fair. I wish he was a few $100s cheaper, but he's probably the second best player on their team right now outside of Ball, and he's got a better situation than Ball does, even though because Ball has a much lower floor. Moving on over to Northern Kentucky and UW uh, Milwaukee. Now, this game does feature a pretty tight spread at just 1.5 points in NKU's favor. It also has the highest total on the slate, so that definitely gives us something to consider today. With that said, I do like a lot of NKU. I think they have three guys that are very favorable today, and then they have one or two other guys that have potential but are kind of risky. So we'll get into that here. So for Northern Kentucky, my top three are Robinson, Warwick, and Wells. I think you could definitely stack these three guys. Looking at Work, he averages 20 points a game. Now, he is somewhat scoring dependent from a fantasy perspective, but if we look, he's been doing that a lot. And even though he does need 32 fantasy points to pay off here, he's been pretty solid in the two games against UW Milwaukee, which NKU split. I do think NKU wins this game, as I just think they have better scores overall. But they don't have the best player on this slate, but they do have one of the better uh, fantasy productive groups that you could stack. Looking at Robinson here for them as well. Now he's a little bit pricey, but he has a pretty good ceiling, and he's played very well against UW Milwaukee this season already. He also has a decent floor, almost as good as Works, and he's probably a little bit safer than Works just because he gets a lot of rebounds as well. And if he can get a double double, he'll definitely pay off here. I also like Wells for them as he's been pretty good lately. His minutes have increased and he's playing pretty solid. He averages 8 points and 5 rebounds a game. He's not their first option by any stretch of imagination, and he does tend to foul a lot, but I do think if he can get at least close to double double, then he can pay off for what we need here. In his two games against UW Milwaukee, he also played well, and he has a pretty safe ceiling and floor here. Not as wide as some of the other players, but at his price point, he's a decent option. I did want to mention TRJ. Now he's missed 3 of the past 4 games, and that is a concern here. As you can see, he only played in one game where he scored 16, only played 16 minutes. But if he were to get back involved here, he has actually played pretty well when he's been given the minutes, and I do like his potential here. So he's also dirt cheap. He might be kind of a Hail Mary play at this point, but if we can find better information that he might end up being certain to play, then he would definitely be somebody that I would consider as a value play on the slate. Looking at UW Milwaukee, now this team doesn't have a whole lot to consider outside of BJ Freeman, but BJ has played very well for them. He's going to be the best player on the floor for this game, and I don't think the NKU is really going to be able to stop him very much. Sorry, I didn't mean to click away from that. He's going to play plenty of minutes. He's also been pretty solid against NKU this season with 28 and 52 fantasy points in the 2 games, which averages around 40 fantasy points per game. And he's by far the best, most complete player on the entire slate with the highest ceiling of any player on the slate because he's averaging 21 points, 6 rebounds, 4 assists for the season, and he has some nice upside here. I felt like that you could look at Fields as well as Pratt a little bit from this team, but they definitely carry a lot of risk, and they don't really have a very high ceiling, and they're not very safe either. So, looking over at the San Francisco Gonzaga game, Gonzaga beat San Francisco twice this season, and they do have the second highest spread on this slate. They also have a pretty high total, and we know Gonzaga does carry a pretty strict bench, pretty strict limit on how much bench play that they get. Their 5 starters are going to play most of the minutes, and that is a good sign for fantasy perspective. Meanwhile, San Francisco also plays a pretty tight bench. However, I felt like San Francisco is going to struggle in this game, and it's definitely a game that I probably am going to avoid San Francisco quite a bit, even though that they do have some decent matchups. I didn't find that they had a lot of utility here, but just looking at them, Williams and Magbu have the best opportunity for this team, but they definitely carry a lot of risk in a tougher matchup. That said, Williams would be the guy that I like a little bit more, as he's got a little bit safer ceiling and floor than Magbu does, because he's a little bit cheaper, and they have very similar stats wise, outside of Magbu being a bit better at the rebounds. That said, I think that they're pretty avoidable on the slate, and those are the two guys. Those are really the two only guys that I really like from this team at all today. Looking over at Gonzaga, though, we do have 4 players I think have some utility, and one of them going to be Hickman. Now, Hickman is a little bit streaky, but he does have some good upside, and he's nice and cheap today. He is somewhat scoring dependent, but he does have a tendency to get some good assist games, and we're definitely going to need that from him to pay off here, but he's definitely capable in this matchup, and he's been playing pretty well recently. Looking at Nimhard, he's a little bit more expensive. He's probably um, he's got the lowest floor of the 3 best players on Gonzaga today, but he does have a good ceiling, and he's played well against San Francisco so far this season with 27 and 35 fantasy points respectively. He does need to be on the higher end of that stretch, though, to pay off here, but he's definitely capable of that. Then we'll look at Ike. He is playing really solid, averaging 16 points, 7 rebounds a game. He's also playing quite a few minutes, and that gives him a lot of utility here. He's also got the highest ceiling and floor on the team, and he's got the safest floor on the team. So he's also been over 4x in both games against San Francisco earlier this year. And if I was going to say who my favorite play from Gonzaga was, it would be him, as he looks like the safest option. But also Watson has some utility here. He's averaged 24 to 40 fantasy points in just about every game this year, and he has some nice potential. His stats are very similar to Ike, and he's a little bit cheaper, so that definitely gives him some utility. Though he does have that random low floor situation, which is a little bit of a concern, but this matchup he's done well against them this season, and he has a pretty safe situation. So I think he's a great play on the slate, and he's definitely worth a look. He's my second favorite from this team. Both Ike and Watson both carry a lot of potential. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.